My talk is called, as you know, I'm John Vennari, editor of Catholic Family News. Also, I worked closely with Father Gruner since 1994. So I've been close to the Fatima Center for quite a while. And my topic is Fatima and the Forces of Antichrist. The other subtitle could be The Social Kingship of the LGBT. As I said, this is well, they just keep adding to it, you know. Anyway, I apologize. It is a distasteful subject, but as you're going to see, it's something that we need to talk about. So, July 13th, 1917, the 99th anniversary of which just passed a couple of weeks ago, Our Lady of Fatima showed the children the terrifying vision of hell. And she said, "You have seen hell where the souls of poor sinners go. To save them, God wants to establish in the world devotion to the Immaculate Heart." We also know that Our Lady told little Jacinta that more souls go to hell for sins of the flesh than for any other reason. So, devotion to the Immaculate Heart, prayer, the sacraments, avoiding the occasion of sin, and recognizing and accepting the genuine Catholic moral teaching are key to living a chaste life, to growing in virtue, and of course, avoiding the punishment of sin, especially sins of the flesh in hell. Now, the plan of hell, as you know, is the exact opposite of the Immaculate Heart, to ensnare as many people as possible in sin, especially the sins of the flesh. Now, this is dangerous on a number of levels, because even while we're here on earth, St. Thomas Aquinas teaches that the first fruits of impurity is blindness of spirit. We lose our ability to make true moral judgments. We start to call good evil and evil good. And this blindness of spirit and blindness of intellect, the inability to make genuine moral judgment, will result in further corruption and perversion being recognized, first accepted, and then considered morally good. And this also has, of course, a deleterious effect on society, because when this type of blindness is rampant in society, you end up with a corrupt culture. Now, I had mentioned in the title the forces of Antichrist, and the fathers and the great doctors of the church have always taught throughout the centuries that a principal characteristic of Antichrist, or of an Antichrist, something that is an Antichrist force, which is not being the Antichrist, kind of a precursor of Antichrist, a principal characteristic of Antichrist leadership and Antichrist society will be the prohibition of the teaching of the gospel. If not the teaching of the entire gospel, certain aspects of the gospel will be deemed against the law. Now, we have already entered into this Antichrist milieu, as there is increasing hostility to the gospel and church teaching, particularly regarding the moral law. And nowhere is this more evident than in the rise of the homosexual movement, which deprecates Catholic moral teaching as a form of hate speech. We're going to see that there was a bishop in Spain. He gave a sermon, and where he just reiterated the Christian teaching against homosexuality, and he was charged for a hate crime. They dropped the charges, but we're going to see more and more of this. Now, let's go back to February 2001, where Barack Hussein Obama announced that he and his Justice Department would no longer defend the Defense of Marriage Act, claiming that it was now suddenly unconstitutional. Now, this 1996 act states that in federal law, the word marriage means only a legal union between one man and one woman, husband and wife, and it prohibits federal government from recognizing same-sex so-called marriages for the purpose of taxes, Social Security, and other programs. Now, Obama, being a creature of the new paganism, was working to clear the path for federal recognition of what is called same-sex marriage. Last June, of course, the Supreme Court, quote-unquote, legalized same-sex marriage. And recent polls indicate that an increasing number of Americans find same-sex marriage, you need to know, of course, we just say, this is no marriage. This is Humpty Dumpty. When I use a word, it means exactly what I claim it to mean, no more, no less. So they're just polluting the language here. But anyway, same-sex marriage. Many Americans find it acceptable, which indicates America's slide from acceptance and recognition of the most basic tenets of natural and divine law. So these disturbing developments provide the opportunity to pose the question, how is it that homosexuality and so-called same-sex marriage is now not only accepted, but vehemently defended by so many individuals? Now, there are many contributing factors, not the least of which is the strategies of the homosexual activists themselves. And our focus here will be on the effective tactics employed by the homosexual movement, clearly spelled out in a 1987 landmark article called The Overhauling of Straight America. It was written by homosexual activists Marshall K. Kirk and Erastus Pill. Pill was the pen name of a man named Hunter Madsen. Both of these men were highly trained. Kirk was Harvard-educated research in neuropsychology, and Madsen had a doctorate in politics from Harvard and was an expert on public persuasion tactics and social marketing. And it is said that this article, The Overhauling of Straight America, has become the Bible of the homosexual movement. What it does is it presents the strategies, first, to make homosexual more acceptable by Americans, and secondly, this is very important for us, to demonize opponents of homosexuals. The entire campaign, of course, is not based on intellectual arguments, but on the emotional manipulation of the public. Kirk and Madsen later expanded these principles into a 398-page book called After the Ball, How America Will Conquer Its Fear and Hatred of Gays in the 1990s. This was published in 1989. But for now, I'm just going to focus on this 1987 article. And in order to convey the true spirit of the piece, I'm going to rely as much as possible on direct quotation. So no one can say that these are my words. I'm going to say exactly what they said. Now, one thing you have to understand, this is not a secret document. We're not talking about conspiracy theories or anything like that. It is openly published in the November 1987 edition of Guide, which is a homosexual publication. And here's how this article, The Overhauling of Straight America, here's how it begins. Quote, the first order of business is the desensitization of the American public concerning gays and gay rights. Gay is not a term that I use, but I have to quote here. To decentralize the public, it has helped to view homosexuality with indifference instead of keen emotion. What are they talking about? Well, in normal times, when people are presented with homosexuality, what do? They recoil. They're horrified by it, okay? Well, they're going to condition that response out of us. They're going to condition this emotion out of us. The authors go on to note that their goal is to make sexual preference placed on the same thing as preference for sports, preference for ice cream. You like hockey, I like softball. Who's wrong? You like pistachio ice cream, I like mint chocolate chip. Nobody's wrong, it's just a preference. Now, at the beginning, we are seeking public desensitization and nothing more. I will say, too, these men were brilliant, and they've been successful. Going on, we do not need and cannot expect full appreciation or understanding of homosexuality from the average American. You can forget about trying to persuade the masses that homosexuality is a good thing, although Barack Obama is now saying it's a good thing. But if you can get them only to think that it's just another thing with a shrug of the shoulders, then your battle for legal and social rights is virtually won. And to get the shoulder shrug state, gays as a class must cease to appear mysterious, alien, and contrary. So the article calls for a massive media campaign to change the image of homosexuals, quote, and any campaign to accomplish this turnaround should accomplish 6 things, okay? So this overhauling of straight America is 6 key strategies for accomplishing what they want to accomplish. And this is directly on my headlines, everything directly taken from the article. Step number 1, talk about gays and gayness as loudly and as often as possible. They write, the principle behind this advice is simple. Almost any behavior begins to look normal if you're exposed to it, enough of it, at close quarters and among your acquaintances. The acceptability of the new behavior will ultimately hinge on the number of one's fellows doing it or accepting it. Okay, so the dynamic of social pressure. Now, a person may be initially offended by the novelty of it all, but as the authors say, as long as Joe Sixpack feels little pressure to perform likewise, and as long as the behavior in question presents little threat to his physical and financial security, he gets used to it and life goes on. And as time goes on, Joe Sixpack and his friends will become more tolerant of homosexuality as nothing more than an alternative, legitimate lifestyle. Quote, the way to benumb raw sensibilities about homosexuality is to have a lot of people talk a great deal about the subject in neutral or a supportive way. I remember in the 1960s, this was never talked about. Started in the 70s, but now talk about it, talk about it, talk about it. Take down the sensitivity. The more it's talked about, the more the impression is created the public opinion is at least divided on the topic. And they say even rancorous debate between opponents and defenders serve our purpose as long as respectable gays are front and center to make their own pitch. Okay, they don't want Boy George up there. All right, they want they want someone who looks good and sounds good and all this business. Now, the authors also insist that this talk about gayness must just be talk, not homosexual indoctrination. In the early stages of any campaign to reach straight America, the masses should not be shocked and repelled by premature exposure to homosexual behavior. Instead, the imagery should be downplayed and gay rights should be reduced to an abstract social question as much as possible. And the authors stress the importance of having homosexual issues talked about in the visual media, film and television, which are, I'm quoting them, the most powerful image makers in Western civilization. Now, at the time, things have changed because of the internet. Because at the time, 1987, the average American spent a good 7 hours per day plopped in front of his television. Here's what they say about that. These hours open a gateway into the private world of straights through which a Trojan horse might be passed. Okay, you see what they're talking. They're talking the language of warfare and deceit. And unlike our side, they fight to win. There's no compromise on their end. Hollywood is described by the authors as the best covert weapon homosexuals have to desensitize the mainstream. They applaud the fact that over the past 10 years, that's up to 1987, homosexual characters have become prominent in films and televised programs. And since then, of course, these characters have become even more common. It's all part of a strategy to mobilize public acceptance of homosexuality. Look at the programs that, well, I'm a little dated because I don't even have a TV, but you know, things like Will and Grace, okay, prominent homosexual character, The L Word, the movie Brokeback Mountain, and even films, I wouldn't recommend either of them, Bridget Jones' Diary, these are films I have seen, and As Good as It Gets. What do they have? They have a central character who's homosexual and likable. Okay, this is all part of the strategy. And Hollywood is, I'll tell you this, I got to see, years ago, I got to see a preview of Mel Gibson's Last Temptation, The Passion of the Christ. It didn't even have the soundtrack. He was using the movie, the sound, the music from The Last Temptation of Christ at the time, just to show the film. And I was talking to someone who was talking to Jim Caviezel's agent. And this agent said to this woman, Hollywood is run by drugs and homosexuals. Okay, so these are the people projecting their image into your living room. Now, amiable characters increasingly feature in modern films and television. It's no accident. Then Kirk and Pill, I'm still on the first principle now. Kirk and Pill lay out their full-scale assault on religion. Quote, while public opinion is one primary source of mainstream values, religious authority is the other. When conservative churches condemn gays, there are two things we can do to confound the homophobia. First, we can use talk to muddy the moral waters. Okay, they're admitting they're going to cause confusion. They're going to undermine. muddy the moral waters. This means publicizing support for gays by more moderate churches, raising theological objections of our own about conservative interpretations of the Bible, and exposing what they call hatred and inconsistency. Second, they continue, we can undermine the moral authority of homophobic churches by portraying them as antiquated and backwards, badly out of step with the times and with the latest findings of psychology. In Catholic circles, you are denounced, even by today's men in the highest places, as legalist and rigorist, if you hold to the truth. Against the mighty pull of institutional religion, they say we must set the mightier draw of science and public opinion. First of all, this is outside the morality of homosexual acts, or any morality, is outside the realm of science. Don't fall for that. Science tells us. Science tells you nothing about morality. It is a different field altogether, different field from ethics altogether. Public opinion. Anyway, such an unholy alliance has worked well against churches before on such topics as divorce and abortion. With enough open talk about the prevalence and acceptance of homosexuality, the alliance could work here again. Okay, so that's point number one. Point number two, step number two, I should say, headline, portray gays as victims and not as aggressive challengers. Reading from Kirk and Pill. In any campaign to win over the public, gays must be cast as victims in need of protection, so that straights will be inclined by reflex to assume the role of protector. If gays are presented instead as strong, prideful tribe promoting a rigid, nonconformist and deviant lifestyle, they are likely more to be seen as a public menace that justifies resistance and oppression. For this reason, we must forego the temptation to strut our gay pride publicly when it conflicts with the gay victim image. And we must walk the fine line between impressing straights with our great numbers on the one hand and not sparking paranoia on the other. He says we have to watch out that we don't give the straights the impression is they're all around us, they're all around us. You know, if they walk that fine line. A media campaign to promote the gay victim image should make use of symbols which reduce the mainstream sense of threat, which lowers its guard, and which enhances the plausibility of victimization. In practical terms, this means that jaunty mustache muscle men would keep very low profile in gay commercials and other public presentations, while sympathetic figures of nice young people, old people, attractive women would be features. And they say flat out, and let's not have any representatives of NAMBLA here. You know what NAMBLA is? The National American Man-Boy Love Association. Because pederasty is a distinctive, is a constituent element of the homosexual culture. He says, we're not going to talk about that, okay? Now, Kirk and Pill outline two different messages about the gay victim that must be communicated. First, the mainstream should be told that gays are victims of fate, in the sense that they never had a choice, you've all heard this, to either accept or reject what they are. It must read, as far as gays can tell, they were just born that way, just as you were born heterosexual, white or black, or bright or athlete. Nobody ever tricked or seduced them. They never made a choice and are not morally brainworthy. This is a materialist, determinist, devoid of morality. They go on. What they do isn't contrary, it's only natural to them, and the twist of fate could have easily happened to you. They continue, straight viewers must be able to identify with gays as victim. Mr. and Mrs. Public must be given no extra excuse to say they're not like us. To this end, the features, this is very important as far as the public image, okay? To this end, the persons featured in the public campaign should be decent and upright, appealing and admirable by straight standards, completely unexceptionable in appearance. In a word, they should be indistinguishable from straights, of the world we want to reach. Only under such conditions will the message be read correctly. These folks are just victims of fate, and they could have happened to me. Now, they went as far to say that there's actually a homosexual gene, okay, but that's when they say try to, turn to science for this type of thing. It doesn't work. The authors go on to say that homosexuals themselves may not look favorably on a strategy that makes them look like victims or some sort of plague, but they say, but the plain fact is that the gay community is weak and must manipulate the powers of the weak, including the play for sympathy. So we see what we're seeing here, okay? Truth does not matter. They're going to muddy the moral waters, and they're going to manipulate. And this could only work, we have the Second Vatican Council to thank for this, this could only work on a already de-Christianized society, okay? Try this under Louis IX, or under Charlemagne or something. Anyway, number 3, very important for the social justice people. Give protectors a just cause. A media campaign that casts gays as society's victims and encourages straights to be their protectors must make it easier for those to respond, to assert, and explain their new protectiveness. Few straight women, or even fewer straight men, want to defend homosexuality boldly as such. Most would rather attach their awkward protective impulse to some principle of justice or law, to some desire for consistent and fair treatment in society. Again, the social justice approach. Our campaign should not demand support for homosexual practice. It should instead take anti-discrimination as its theme. Now, this is how modern churchmen talk. This is how the New Catechism talks. By avoiding all unjust discrimination, as Brian McCall said, our side is picking up the language of the enemy, and we're losing as soon as we do that. The right to free speech, freedom of belief, freedom of association, due process, and equal protection of the laws, these should be concerns brought to mind in our campaign. I can skip this. Step number 4, here's another one. Make gays look good. In order to make a gay victim sympathetic to straights, you have to portray him as every man. But an additional theme of the campaign should be more aggressive and upbeat. To offset the increasing bad press these times have brought to homosexuals, the campaign should paint gays as superior pillars of society. You know, great men like Barney Frank, all right? Superior pillars of society. And then they even say, yes, we know this trick is so old that it creaks. But other minorities use them in ads that say proudly, did you know that this great man was this or was that? Now they're saying homosexual. They even try to claim that Shakespeare was homosexual. Okay. But the message is vital for all those straights who still picture gays as queer people. Shadowy, lonesome, drunken, suicidal, child-snatching misfits, okay? They want to do away with that. But the main point is portray homosexuals as a legitimate minority, like Native American, Black, Asian, homosexual, okay? By the way, the blacks aren't too crazy about the fact that they're doing that. They're the smart ones. And the authors see importance as the great importance of celebrity endorsement. You know, and the celebrities can be straight. They make a special thank you to Ed Asner in this. Everybody remembers him. Okay, step number 5, key in relation to us, make the victimizers look bad. Quoting directly, at a later stage of the media campaign for gay rights, long after other gay ads have become commonplace, it will be time to get tough with remaining opponents. To be blunt, they must be vilified. Our goal here is twofold. First, we seek to replace the mainstream self-righteous pride about his homophobia with shame and guilt. Second, listen to this, we intend to make the anti-gays look so nasty that the average American will want to disassociate themselves from such types. Go on any secular or modernist college campus and say you're opposed to homosexuality. You will be vilified, you will be attacked by these poor, airheaded students who are growing up without any knowledge, any culture, except for indoctrination. We don't want anything to do. I know a young girl who was at a class, you think classical music's safe. She was at a classical music camp when the Supreme Court, quote unquote, legalized same-sex marriage. And this one young girl said, I couldn't be friends with anyone who doesn't accept gay marriage. I mean, that's how successful this has been. The public should be shown images of ranting homophobes whose secondary traits and beliefs disgust middle America. These images might include the Ku Klux Klan demanding that gays be burned alive or castrated, bigoted Southern ministers drooling with hysterical hate to a degree that looks both comical and deranged. This is all manipulation of images, okay? Menacing punks, thugs, and convicts who speak openly and coolly about the fags they've killed or would like to kill. A tour of Nazi concentration camps where homosexuals were tortured and gassed. Again, this is all, remember, appealing to image, appealing to emotion, the intellect's not involved. This is interesting. These images should be combined with those of gay victims by a method propagandists call the bracket technique. For example, now you see this on TV, and I'm sure Peter knows this technique. What they do is they go and they have this close-up of this beady-eyed Southern preacher drooling, condemn these people to hell, and then they shift over to a very pleasant-looking homosexual or homosexual couple who looks fine, and they keep shifting those things back and forth. Okay, who you going to side with? Your emotions is going to side with the people who are not spewing all this venom and who look kind and respectable. The picture swapped the pictures switches to pathetic photos, etc. Then we cut back to the poisonous face of the preacher and so forth. The contrast speaks for itself, and the effect is devastating. Okay, so that's point number 5. Make anti-homosexuals, you have to vilify them. And 6, solicit funds. The buck stops here. They go on. Any massive campaign of this kind would require unprecedented expenditure for months or for even years, an unprecedented fundraising drive, and they call upon homosexuals to contribute heavily to the campaign, and they say to flat out, look, you're not supporting families. You give everything to the cause. I have a friend of mine who has a cousin who's a homosexual, and he boasted of this. Yeah, you're spending all your time and money on your family, raising your family. We spend all our time and money on our cause. And also, one of the things too is they pressure businesses and things like that to contribute to them because they let it be known that we don't want to have to tell people that you people are homophobes. And Home Depot and all these places, let's just give them the money. They don't want to be bothered with this. So we're going to summarize the 6 points before we go to the next awful topic. And that is 6 points of Kirk and Bill. They've been successful. Number 1, talk about gays as loudly and as often as possible. Number 2, portray gays as victims, not as aggressive challengers. Number 3, give protectors a just cause, the social justice liberals. Number 4, make gays look good. Number 5, vilify anti-homosexuals. And number 6, raise money, raise money, raise money. 2 years later, they wrote that big book, After the Ball. And they stated, you can check it out for yourself, page 153. They state their plan for a mass propaganda for converting America to promote the homosexual cause. Here's what they say, direct quotation. By conversion, we mean something far more profoundly threatening to the American way of life, without which no truly sweeping social change can occur. We mean the conversion of the average American's emotions, mind, and will through a planned psychological attack in the form of a propaganda fed to the nation via the media. Close quote. Again, page 153 of After the Ball. What does this mean? We have been manipulated and corrupted. And that should infuriate anyone. We have been manipulated and corrupted, and they have been successful. And it's even getting more perverse. As I said, it's going to continue to spiral downward because now we've even gone beyond this and we face this bizarre issue of transgenderism and the forced acceptance in society of transgenders in society, government, and even the military. Do you remember, who was the one on MASH that dressed up like a girl? Yeah, he was doing it to show that he was crazy. Right now, Obama has just said, no, let them serve as transgenders, okay? Beyond sanity. But here's what we're going to take a look at. What's this really all about? What's this really all about? The present furor over transgenders in bathroom is not really about dealing with discrimination. Remember, that's the social justice bit. But it is actually a war against nature itself and the establishment of a new social order based on the denial of this nature. The goal of feminists and homosexual activists is an attempt to destroy the distinction between male and female and restructure society away from this reality. They do not accept a person's sex as immutably assigned at birth. They claim that such an understanding of gender is artificial. It's an artificial social construct. Rather, they believe that an individual may self-identify as a member of the opposite sex or a number of, I think they're up to at least now 58 different genders that you can choose. I don't know how these things work. And they all have little symbols, too, to go along with them. All right? This is where we are. Now, these activists worked with determination to remake society into their own image and likeness, and they strive to criminalize any dissent from their new vision. For example, New York City, the Human Rights Commission has announced it will fine New York employees, the way, what do they call themselves, Z and here, something like ZE or HIR, when they're pretending to be something they're not. If you're an employer in New York and you refuse to call the transgender person the gender name of their choice, New York City has said, the Human Rights Commission, you will be fined $250,000 if you refuse to do it, okay? Transgender activist Ricky Wilson says that the activists must advocate blowing up binary. Does everybody know what he's talking about with binary? Binary is the truth that if I ask everybody in this audience, one by one, what are you? There's only one of two answers you can give honestly. Man or woman, to binary. This is a false social construct. It has to be destroyed. Okay, that's their real goal. It's a war against nature. Here's what he says. There's a homosexual magazine called The Advocate. What really needs to be contested here is not just our right to use bathrooms with dignity, but the underlying hetero-binary structure of the world that queers must inhabit. And so I said that what it is. Okay, now, he says this is a real struggle, and queer activists have been talking about it since the 1970s, or gay liberation. But in time, the movement nudged it aside, but now he's happy that this is being put on the front burner again. And commenting on Wilkins, the conservative writer Rod Dreher says the transgender activists want to destroy the concept of male and female entirely. This is what they're after, and they're not going to stop until it's accomplished. Remember, they fight to win. And if you think the federal courts or democratic administrations are going to stop it, you have a lot more faith than I do than the moral sanity of American elites. Now, a journalist and homosexual activist named Michelangelo Signorile, he too speaks plainly about the movement's aim, which is the destruction of the family. He says, quote, the goal of the homosexual movement is to fight to same-sex marriage and its benefits. And then once this is achieved, and it's just been achieved in the United States, once this is achieved, to completely redefine the institution of marriage, not to demand the right to marriage as a way to bind ourselves to society's morals, but to debunk a myth and turn an age-old institution on its head. The subversive act that gays and lesbians are undertaking is the idea of completely changing the family. They call it a subversive act. Along the same line, Peter Sprigg, someone on our side from the senior fellow, a senior fellow for the Policy Institutes of the Family Research Council, he says the long-term goals of many LGBT activists are actually not just about access to restrooms and their preferred gender identity, but actually to destroy the concept of gender and the separation of gender altogether. Okay, we have gone into grand mal insanity. Now, much of this homosexual revolution is documented in a superb book recently released by a Catholic sociologist named Gabrielle Kubi. She's from Germany. The book is called The Global Sexual Revolution, Destruction of the Freedom in the Name of Freedom. And Kubi spotlights what is called gender mainstreaming. That's the term. And she warns, quote, "We are contemporaries of a cultural revolution that reaches into every home and heart. Never before has there been an ideology that aims to destroy the gender identity of man and woman and every ethical standard of sexual or moral behavior. And this ideology is called, as I said, gender mainstreaming." Now, Kubi rightly decries this new ideology as a kind of totalitarianism and paints an accurate picture of the present state of disorder. This is a quote from Kubi. She's a sociologist, if I didn't tell you. Quote, "Today, anyone in the political, academic, or media, or even ecclesiastical realm, who brings forth reasons why the sexual act belongs exclusively within the marital relationship between a man and woman and should be open to conceiving children, this person puts himself at risk. Anyone who scientifically discusses the risks and consequences of non-heterosexual behavior or flat out opposes sexual deregulations opens himself to becoming a social pariah. He may be excluded from public discourse, stigmatized with obscenities, lose his professional position. This has all happened. Harassed in many ways by interest groups and otherwise discriminated against. In Germany, the author's home country, demonstrations on behalf of family values need heavy police protection. Criminalization through anti-discrimination laws and punishable offenses such as homophobia and hate speech is already a reality in some countries and is being promoted globally. Now, this neo-pagan cultural revolution, close quote, this neo-pagan cultural revolution encompasses the powerful forces for population control, feminism, abortion called reproductive rights by the United Nations, homosexuality, gender mainstreaming. And Mrs. Kubi documents extensively that the United Nations, the European Union, and countless NGOs, non-government organizations, and other powerful groups advance this new system worldwide. These groups receive millions of dollars to promote this agenda, and there are actually non-government organizations, NGOs, that monitor nation states' compliance for pro-homosexual anti-discrimination laws. These groups influence governments, judicial systems, education, media, and more. They work to permeate every vestige of society with their perverse program, including, this is the horrifying point, including the sexualization and the degenderization of young children. School things where little kindergarten children are told to cross-dress, the little boys wearing nylons. It is beyond repulsive, okay? Our world leaders are doing nothing. Our church leaders presently are doing virtually nothing. In the United States, the two most prominent political creatures who promote this agenda are Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. The agenda is virtually part of the Democratic Party platform, which is a neo-pagan platform, of course. Hillary Clinton, during her term as Secretary of State, is on record favoring gender abstract terms. So on passports and other documents, you don't say, you don't have mother or father, you have parent one, parent two. This is really taking off in England right now, by the way, and it's being introduced here. Obama, a longtime advocate of homosexual issues, made headlines on May 13th of this year when he decreed mandatory transgender-ready mixed-sex bathrooms and locker rooms for all public schools. Comply, Obama says, and the school will be stripped of federal funding. Now, Ben Johnson, a journalist for LifeSite News, there was a lot in the news about this, but Ben Johnson got to the three most underreported points of Obama's decree. Number one, these are dangers wrapped in. Number one, school districts must allow biological males and females to spend the night together in the same hotel room on field trips, okay? If they want to spend the night together, you can't stop them. Number two, it gets worse, colleges must let men who say they are transgenders be roommate with one or more women. And number three, school officials cannot even tell these young women or their parents about this transgender roommate in advance because they will risk a federal lawsuit. Okay, this is the power of the state persecuting and pushing a perverse program. So, as I said, once again, Obama's edict has little to do with correcting alleged discrimination. It has everything to do with advancing a poisonous cultural revolution that tramples natural law, tramples divine law, tramples the rights of anyone who stands in its way. These people who are calling for tolerance, believe me, they are the most intolerant. Likewise, the new bathroom policies at Target stores and other places are enacted, as I said earlier, either due to intense pressure of homosexual groups. As I said, they let it be known, we don't want to have to tell people that you're homophobic. Or the corporations just see that pandering to transgenders and that type of thing is just the wave of the future, so don't buck it. You know, most businessmen are simply unethical, pragmatic American businessmen. They don't want the problems. Give them their money, give them what they want. We don't want bad press. Now, gender mainstreaming, so-called, follows the theories of pseudo-academics of so-called gender studies, the rage on modern campuses, especially Ivy League universities. And a prominent pseudo-academic is a woman named Judith Butler, who is hailed as a pioneer of gender theory. She's stark raving out of her mind. But anyway, you'll hear. Gabriel Kubi sums up Butler's gender theory as follows. Basically, now she's accurately summarizing Butler's theories. There are no such thing as men and women. One sex is only a fantasy, something we accept because we hear it constantly repeated. Biological sex, that is the sex assigned us at birth, male or female, represents the dictatorship of nature. That's what she calls it, the dictatorship of nature, against a person's self-definition. And this, we must free ourselves from this dictatorship. See, they're at war with nature itself. It's the human will over what is true. Gender is not associated with the sex assigned to us at birth, which plays no part because it merely is created by language and created by what the person repeatedly hears. There is no masculine being. There is no feminine being, but only a certain performance, a behavior that can change at any time. Butler goes on to teach that there should also be no taboo on incest. Okay, this is kind of a patriarchal structure or whatever. Not only must we eliminate concepts such as man, woman, father, and mother, but society's heterodox signatures must be eliminated in all spheres: man and woman, marriage and the family, father and mother, sexuality or fertility are not deemed natural. It is claimed they establish hegemony of men over women and of heterosexuality over all forms of sexuality, and this must be destroyed at its roots. So everything's from this perverse feminist and homosexualist viewpoint. Now, here's the question, though. How does the world react to Butler's theories? How does the academic world react to Butler's radical theories? With lavish praise, with prestigious awards, and with mountains of cash. Mountains of cash. Listen to this. In 1999, now you see what this person is advancing. In 1999, Butler received a Guggenheim Fellowship. In 2001, she received a Rockefeller Fellowship. In 2004, she received the Yale University Brudner Prize for special achievement in gay and lesbian studies. Butler went on to receive the Andrew Mellon Award in 2008, which is endowed with $1 million and is meant to enable its recipients to teach and do research under favorable positions. She went on to be rewarded a $50,000 Euro Theodore W. Adorno Prize in 2012 and received an honorary doctorate from the Swiss University in Freiburg in 2014 for her political involvement for the rights of homosexuals, okay? And she's been a visiting professor at Columbia University since 2012, okay? The world loves its own. Most remarkable of all, says Gabriel Kubi, is that the subversive theory of Judith Butler, along with the theories of her masters and comrade-in-arms, is welcomed by the world's academic elites and implemented by them. This is the state of the modern college campus, believe me. This is the state. Gender theory, such as that of advanced by Butler, is rampant on on college and university campuses. And this brave new world, of course, falls under the condemnation of Isaiah, chapter 5:20. Woe to those who call good evil and evil good. But what's even more disturbing is that their entire program and their method actually imitates the working principles that make up the social kingship of Christ. The social kingship of Christ is a bedrock doctrine of the Catholic Church, not subject to change, not subject to be updated. And to put it in the most simple language possible, the social kingship of Christ is the truth that states and governments and social institutions must base their law of right and wrong on what the gospel teaches is right and wrong, and on what the church teaches is right and wrong. And any other way is out of order. The social kingship of Christ strives to permeate every vestige of society with the beautiful truths of Christ and his church and his moral law. Now, the social kingship of Christ is difficult. It demands that our bishops stand up to world leaders when they steer their ship against the Lord God, as Becket said. But as you already know, at the Second Vatican Council, our church leaders abandoned the social kingship of Christ for their new program of dialogue with the world. The new program shrinks from advancing the truth that the world must conform to our Lord and not he to it. And the new approach certainly might make the bishops' lives a lot easier. But the result is cataclysmic for the church, to souls, to society. Dialogue with the world, it is a dialogue. It's a dialogue in which the world calls the shots, the world directs the program, and the world emerges constantly victorious. So the gender revolution actually apes what Catholic churchmen should do, and unlike our churchmen, these homosexual activists, they fight to win. The homosexual movement, you'll notice, does not content itself with just requesting an equal place at the table. They are ultimately insist on dominance that seeks to permeate every vestige of society, to criminalize opposition. As Kubi says, we face a cultural revolution that reaches into every home and heart. Now, something at least uplifting. I'm going to quote the great championing of the social kingship of Christ, a great French cardinal named Cardinal Pia of Poitiers, who was one of St. Pius X's favorite writers. Pius X said, "Never a day goes by where I don't read something from Cardinal Pia." And Pia explained the importance of the social kingship of Christ, the fact that Christ's presence and influence must permeate every vestige of society for Christianity and Christian civilization to survive. Listen to this. This is magnificent. He says, quote, "So long as Christ does not reign over nations, his influence over individuals remains superficial and precarious. If it is true that the work of the apostolate consists in the conversion of individuals, and that nations as such do not go to heaven, but souls one by one, we must never forget that the individual member of society lives under the never-ceasing influence of his environment, in which, if we may say he is not submerged, he is at least deeply plunged. So in other words, Cardinal Pia is saying that it's not really so much the Sunday sermons that he hears, but it's the environment in which he lives throughout the week that's going to have the greatest impact on his life. Pia goes on, Cardinal Pia goes on, if the environment, quote, "If the environment is not Catholic, it prevents him from embracing the faith. Or if he has the faith, it tends to root out of his heart every vestige of belief. If we imagine Catholic social institutions with our Lord no longer living in the hearts of individual members of society, then religion there has become merely a displeasing signboard which will soon be torn down. But," he says, "on the other hand, try to convert individuals without Catholicizing the social institutions, and your work is without stability. The structure you erect in the morning will be torn down by others in the evening." And then he points to the enemy. He says, "Is not the strategy of the enemies of God there to teach us a lesson? They want to destroy the faith in the hearts of individuals, it's true, but they direct still more vigorous effort to the elimination of religions from social institutions. Even one defeat of God in this domain means the weakening, if not the ruin of the faith in the souls of many. Close quote. This is what a Catholic bishop should sound like. Now, as I said, due to the new program of Vatican II, our churchmen shirk their duty of Catholicizing the social order, and what happens? Of course, the revolution steps in to fill the vacuum and ensures that the perverse principles of revolution are not only the ruling force in society, but become the very air we breathe. I've been seeing interviews of conservative journalists who go onto college campuses and say, "Do you think there's really only such thing, of man and woman?" "Oh no, that shouldn't be. That's just made up." Or some people think that it shouldn't be. So he said, "Well, suppose I self-identify as a goldfish from China," and you see the one guy go back and says, "Hey, go you." I'm serious. This is the elite. This is the college students. Okay, it's beyond horrifying. Now, the Catholic hierarchy have effectively surrendered, especially under the Francis administration, and our bishops consistently, and this is nothing new. This has been since Vatican II. Consistently treat pro-homosexual, pro-abortion Catholic politicians and as Catholics in good standing with complete access to the sacraments. One example among many is our dear friend Timothy Cardinal Dolan. Now, Dolan lamented in 2013 about the Supreme Court decision that struck down the Defense of Marriage Act, okay? As Eliza Doolittle would say in My Fair Lady, words, words, words. I'm so sick of words. Okay, it's just words. Because only a month before, what did Dolan's archdiocese do? They said, quote, about Governor Cuomo. Now, Governor Cuomo pushed through the homosexual marriage. He's ferociously pro-abortion, and he's living with a woman he's not even married to. And what does Dolan's chancery say? We would not suggest that Governor Cuomo is not a good Catholic, is not a Catholic in good standing. What does it take to be a Catholic in bad standing? Okay, all right. Anyway, so the bishops make a great show of talk, but effectively do nothing. Yet in their words, they never reiterate, most of them anyway. There's a couple trying to make some noise now, but for the most part, they never reiterate the basic truths that homosexual acts are mortal sins that send unrepentant souls to hell for eternity. They don't use even the term in the New Catechism, which is these acts are intrinsically disordered and against natural law. Now, there is no doubt that the Vatican II revolution, the failure of Catholic teachers to teach the faith in its integrity for 50 years, the reluctance of churchmen to preach against mortal sins of the flesh, the effect of the diabolic disorientation of the upper hierarchy, the term used by Sister Lucy, are central factors in the ascendancy of this fire-breathing cultural revolution. Now, some might remember the name Father Enrique Rueda, warned against this decades ago, 1982. He wrote a book called The Homosexual Network, and he talked about the fact that the homosexuals recognize that the churches are the great enemy. They have to be taken down. They have to be neutralized. And here's what Rueda wrote in 1982. There is no question that the main stumbling block in the theoretical and practical acceptance of homosexuality by American society has been traditional religion. This has been perfectly understood by the leadership of the homosexual movement, and further, the importance of gaining the support of churches, or at least neutralizing them, is widely acknowledged by homosexual leaders. So this co-opting and neutralization of churches, well, the Catholic Church and other denominations, has exceeded beyond their wildest dreams, and it is evidenced by the state of Catholic institutes of higher learning. There is an aggressive pro-homosexual Catholic group called New Ways Ministry, and they advance the so-called LGBT agenda. And on their website, they list 83 North American Catholic universities that are gay-friendly. They boast of it. Most of which, surprise, surprise, are Jesuit-run institutions. And these places too have coming out days for students and faculty. All right. Now, as for the Jesuits, Father, when I heard that they elected a Jesuit to be Pope, I said, we're finished. We're finished. And nothing has nothing has happened to make me change that opinion. Anyway, as for the Jesuits, there's a good priest named Father Paul Shaughnessy. He states that the problem of homosexual-friendly campuses can be traced to the Jesuit leadership itself. He notes that some of the most prestigious posts at universities, such as university administrators and presidents, are generally filled by Jesuit priests unofficially known as the gallery owners. Okay, now they're called that because there's this strong affinity between homosexuals and the art world. Okay, so they call these Jesuit priests, these homosexual priests, the gallery owners. All right. These Jesuits skilled at fundraising are described by Father Shaughnessy as discreet, well-spoken, well-dressed gay priests in their 50s and 60s. I've met some of these. In his article, Are Jesuits Catholic? Here's how he explains it, Father Shaughnessy. Quote, where the older Jesuits are notable for the heat of their anti-papal passions, the gallery owners display a near complete apathy towards religion in all its forms. You know, it's right out of the Prime Minister. You know, complete ignorance of theology. They couldn't care less. Conveniently liberal, they support condoms and women priests less as a matter of fact than as a fashion statement, rather like wearing a baseball hat backwards. The teaching of the Church, being largely an irrelevance, has minimal importance in shaping the opinion of the gallery owners, who tend to regard Orthodox Catholicism, like boxing or heterosexuality, as the coarse amusements of the working class. Right? Now, the ugly facts of the homosexual scandal within the Catholic Church, I've discussed it repeatedly I've discussed it, documented in Catholic Family News time and time again. I'm not going to go through it now. But needless to say, this corruption reduces to impotence a clergy who should battle for the faith and for the faithful. And yet, this is not something that the bishops and the priests and the Pope even have a choice. They have the inescapable duty, Catholic priests, bishops, cardinals, and the Pope, to reiterate the truth without ambiguity and without apology that homosexuality stands condemned by both natural law and divine law. We're going to cover this very quickly because we're coming to the end. All right. First, natural law. Now, natural law, and luckily Dr. Brian McCall talked about this a little bit today. Natural law starts with the truth that man has a nature, and that what he ought to do, his role of behavior, must conform to his nature. He must fulfill the end for which he is made, the end of his nature. Okay. Otherwise, his acts are contrary to reason. Now, natural law especially comes into play with moral acts, since natural law judges an act by its natural end. What is the purpose of the act? Suicide, for example, is condemned by natural law because the most basic natural good is to preserve one's life. So the direct taking of one's own life is contrary to this fundamental principle. It frustrates the purpose of life. It's against natural law. Natural law also forbids lying. Okay, because what is the nature of speech? What is its purpose? What is its end? Speech is for the sake of communicating truth. And if speech is purposely employed to communicate untruth, it is against the nature of speech, it is unreasonable, it is immoral. Another obvious argument from natural law concerns the marital act. Okay, and luckily Brian talked about this earlier today. It is primarily, its first purpose is the transmission of life. That's its primary purpose. And it's obvious in every part of its design. That is the ultimate purpose. I mean, when you go into something like contraception, you have to consider all the pills and the operations and the this and the that you have to do to prevent the natural act from being natural. Okay? It's the nature of the act that's the purpose of it, the begetting of children. And all the other goods associated with it are inducements to the act, but the primary end of the act is for conception and the begetting of what Dr. Raphael Waters called new live man. Now, you'll notice in my natural law examples, I didn't even have to invoke scripture. Man, thinking clearly, can arrive at these truths even without the help of divine revelation. And this is one of the reasons why, of course, we say natural law arguments are based on reason. As Dr. Raphael Rother's Thomist always said, the end, that is the final purpose of the act, is principle in moral matters. Traditional natural law teaching in marriage also debars any thought of so-called same-sex marriage. Terrific young Thomist professor Edward Fazer, here's what he said in an interview. He said, according to natural law theory, marriage is a natural institution. That means it has a nature, an essence, just like Euclidean triangles, dogs, cats, lead, gold, and other natural substances have. Therefore, it isn't something we can change just by changing a legal definition, any more than a legislation or a judge could decide that cats by name ought to have 5 legs, or that the Pythagorean, how do you say that? Pythagorean. I always stumble on this. Pythagorean theorem ought no longer to apply to right triangles. Moreover, according to natural law theory, given the nature or essence of marriage, it is inherently heterosexual. So, natural law teaches us this. Now, along with natural law, we know that homosexuality stands condemned by divine law. Genesis chapters 15 and 16. And the Lord said, the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is multiplied, and their sin is becoming exceedingly grievous. And the Lord rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of the heavens. And he destroyed these cities and all the countries about, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and all the things that spring from the earth. A couple more examples from Scripture. Leviticus 18:22. Thou shalt not lie with mankind as with womankind, because it is an abomination. Leviticus 20:13. If anyone lie with a man as with a woman, both have committed an abomination. Romans 1, verses 26-27. For this cause God has given them up to shameful lusts, for their women has exchanged the natural use for that which is against nature. And in like manner the men, also having abandoned the natural use of women, have burned in their lusts one towards another. Men with men doing shameful things and receiving in themselves the fitting recompense of their perversity. 2 Peter, our first pope, Peter 2:4, and reducing the cities of the Sodomites and of the Gomorrites into ashes, condemned them to be overthrown, making them an example to those who shall act wickedly. And finally, the Epistle of Jude, chapter 1, verse 7, as Sodom and Gomorrah and the neighboring cities in like manner, having given themselves to fornication and going after other flesh, were made an example, suffering the punishment of eternal fire. We'll have one quote from a long line of quotes we could take from tradition, St. Augustine in the Confessions. Those shameful acts against nature, such as were committed in Sodom, ought everywhere and always to be detested and punished. If all nations were to do such things, they would be held guilty of the same crime by the law of God, which has not made men so they should use one another in this way. Okay, now when was the last time you heard a priest or a bishop or a cardinal or even a pope teach this clearly? Instead, we hear, especially now, endless blather about humanistic themes such as protecting the environment and opening our national borders to migrants. The new orientation from the council and the resultant corruption of many in the clergy has effectively, as I said, defanged our church. Our church leaders, many of whom are nothing more than smiling facilitators of dialogue, seem incapable of mounting an effective fight against these contemporary forces of evil. Yet, for their own survival, they better step up soon. They better wake up soon. Because wrapped up, as I've been saying all along, in this new pro-homosexual, gender mainstreaming social order is the criminalization of those who oppose the program. I'm convinced that if Hillary's elected, I don't know about Trump. Yes, no, I don't know. But if Hillary's elected, it's a matter of time before a priest refusing same-sex marriage will be criminalized. They must, because what the Kirk and Pill say, the opponents must be vilified. And if our churchmen do not mount an effective opposition, it's only a matter of time before it is declared a crime to preach uncompromising Christian morality, and the church will not be immune from this persecution. As I said, too, in the beginning, this is a characteristic of antichrist, the prohibition of the gospel or certain aspects of the gospel. Now, we note in passing that Pope Francis's post-synodal document, Amoris Laetitia, is of no help in this regard. Yes, it speaks against gender theory, and even then it's using the language of the enemy. I mean, anyway, I won't go into it, but they've surrendered. And if anything, Amoris Laetitia is an aid to the enemy because it refuses to identify homosexuality as intrinsically disordered, and it downplays natural law, which is the key principle against the so-called gender fluidity. Further, just this past May, when Italy, quote-unquote, legalized same-sex unions, Pope Francis did not say a word, not a word against it. There were pro-lifers, family people in Italy pleading with the Vatican, say something. Before, during, after, he said nothing, okay? This is criminal negligence, even though he's the Pope. Criminal negligence. And what it's going to do? Nothing but silence on the passage of a bill that is another milestone for the advancement of homosexuality and gender mainstreaming in society. We know when Elton John publicly praises Pope Francis for what appear to be his pro-homosexuals friendly statements, who am I to judge? You know that we are in unspeakable trouble. And on July 7th, just a few weeks ago, Pope Francis chose the homosexual-friendly Archbishop of Chicago, Archbishop Blaise Cupich, to a bishop-making panel in the Vatican. He's going to have the power and the authority to choose the men to be bishops in the United States and elsewhere. Now, I did say he was pro-homosexual. Let me give 3 instances. We are wrapping it up. 2015, in response to the Supreme Court's decision to, quote-unquote, legalize same-sex marriage, Archbishop Cupich focused on decrying alleged discrimination against homosexuals rather than denouncing the imposition of same-sex marriage on the nation. Second, in the wake of the recent Orlando massacre, June 11th, Cupich made a point to reference, I'm quoting him, our gay and lesbian brothers and sisters in a call in efforts to promote tolerance, okay? Could have come straight from the mouth of Barack Obama. And third, this past October, at the Synod in Rome, Cupich told the press that he would allow his priests to give communion to divorced and remarried Catholics, as well as to practicing homosexuals who in their conscience believe that they should receive because, as he says, conscience is supreme. Now, would you let anyone like this man anywhere near your family, anywhere near your children? Yet Francis handpicked Cupich for this powerful and prestigious position. And as Crux News celebrated, I'm quoting, Francis positioned Cupich to help shape the next generation of bishops in the United States and around the world. So this means that homosexual-friendly Cupich will recommend men of his kind to become bishops in the United States and elsewhere. The diabolical disorientation has never appeared to be so diabolic. Now, there's a lot we could say on the topic. I regret to say I've barely scratched the surface. I've barely scratched the surface. But to conclude, those who oppose this perversion must be vilified. The present furor over transgenders in bathrooms is not really about alleged discrimination. It is actually a war against nature and the establishment of a social order based on this denial. The goal of feminist and homosexual activists is an attempt to destroy the distinction between male and female and to structure society away from this reality. These activists work to remake society into their own image and likeness, and they strive to criminalize any dissent from their new vision. And this is the polar opposite of anybody who says the consecration's been done. This is a defining mark of the triumph of the Immaculate Heart, this gender homosexual totalitarianism. They're blind if they can't see. It's the polar opposite of the triumph of the Immaculate Heart. Now, back in the 16th century, our Lord, Our Lady, and our Lord told Mother Mariana in Quito, the miraculous image of Our Lady of Good Success, he said, I shall punish heresy, blasphemy, and impurity. and that these would be the major sins of the 20th century. And this is what we're going through now. And I wish I could say, the bishops are going to protect us. They won't. I wish I could say Pope Francis is going to protect us. He will not. And he will not protect your children, all the while parading around in this ridiculous, I'm the first pastoral pope in history. You want to be respectful, but I'm telling you, it's too much. As a father of a family, it's too much. So Our Lady of Good Success did say that the great crisis of faith in the 20th century will be a test for the good. We're being tested. And we have to pray, stay close to Our Lady, that we pass this test, that we learn the faith and protect the faith and teach the true faith and the message of Fatima to anyone in our sphere of influence. So thank you for your attention.